The hotel hall looked like a place built for people who never worried about tomorrow. Tall walls glowed under warm lights, and long tables were covered with white cloth so clean they almost looked unreal. Soft music floated in the air, barely loud enough to notice. Every chair, every glass, every decoration spoke of money and power. People here wore confident smiles, the kind learned over years of winning deals and giving orders. This was a world where respect was measured by wealth, and silence often meant agreement. Maya walked beside her parents as they entered the hall. She was young, but her eyes were observant and calm. She noticed how people glanced at them, how some eyes lingered a little too long on their simple clothes. Her mother Lena held her hands together, her posture polite and reserved. Her father Arun walked steadily, his face quiet but firm. They were not used to places like this, yet they carried themselves with quiet dignity. They had been invited unexpectedly, a formal card arriving without explanation, and curiosity had brought them here. They took their seats at one end of the long table. Around them sat business leaders, investors, and guests from different countries. Conversations flowed about numbers, deals, and plans that sounded far removed from everyday life. Maya listened, understanding only parts of it, but she felt the tone. It was sharp, competitive, and proud. She glanced at her parents and felt a sense of comfort. Their calm presence reminded her of home, where evenings were filled with simple talks and shared meals. At the center of the table sat Mr. Kuroda, the host of the evening. He was a man known across borders for his wealth and influence. His posture was relaxed, his movements controlled, as if the room itself belonged to him. People laughed a little louder at his words and leaned in when he spoke. He had built his life on discipline and control, believing that strength came from standing above others. To him, status defined worth. Mr. Kuroda's eyes moved across the table as he spoke, greeting familiar faces. Then his gaze stopped on Maya and her family. His expression changed slightly, not with surprise but with judgment. He observed their clothes, their quiet manner, their lack of confidence in this setting. A faint smile appeared on his face, thin and knowing. He leaned back in his chair and spoke, his voice clear enough for nearby guests to hear. "These events have become very inclusive lately," he said casually. "It seems anyone can find their way in now." A few people chuckled softly. Others exchanged quick looks, unsure whether to react. Lena felt the comment like a small sting, but she kept her eyes down. Arun tightened his hands briefly, then relaxed them. He had learned over the years that reacting often gave people like this exactly what they wanted. Maya felt the change in the air, a subtle tension that wrapped around the table. Mr. Kuroda continued, his tone still light but edged with pride. "When people enter a place like this, they should understand its culture. Respect is important, especially when you are surrounded by those who have worked hard to be here." His eyes flicked toward Maya's family again. The meaning behind his words was clear. The table grew quieter. Some guests shifted in their seats, uncomfortable but silent. The waiters slowed their movements, sensing the mood. Maya looked at her parents. She saw the patience in her mother's face and the restraint in her father's eyes. They were not ashamed, only calm. That calm gave her strength. She remembered long days in a small Japanese town, where people welcomed her family after a disaster. She remembered broken buildings, shared meals, and kind voices teaching her words she practiced every night. Those memories filled her with warmth. Mr. Kuroda finally addressed her directly. "And you," he said, his voice cool. "Do you even understand where you are sitting tonight?" Maya felt her heart beat faster, but her mind stayed clear. She straightened her back slightly and stood. The movement drew attention from everyone at the table. She took a slow breath. When she spoke, her voice was gentle but steady. She did not raise it, yet it carried across the quiet room. She spoke in Japanese. Her words flowed naturally, each sound clear and confident. She thanked Mr. Kuroda for hosting the evening and for inviting guests from many places. She explained that her family had spent years in Japan helping a small community rebuild after a natural disaster. She spoke of her father working alongside locals to repair homes and schools, and her mother teaching children who had lost so much. She shared how the people there treated her family not as outsiders, but as friends. As she spoke, the room seemed to hold its breath. Guests leaned forward, surprised by her fluency. Some recognized the care in her words, the respect behind each sentence. Maya continued, explaining that she learned the language not to impress anyone, but because it was given to her with kindness. She spoke of respect as something grown through understanding, not demanded through power. When she finished, she bowed her head slightly and sat back down. Silence filled the hall. It was deep and heavy, pressing against every wall. Mr. Kuroda stared at her, his confident expression gone. For a moment, he looked like a man caught off guard, pulled back into a memory he did not expect. Around the table, faces showed surprise, admiration, and discomfort. The balance of the room had shifted, and everyone felt it. Maya's parents remained still, their faces calm. They did not smile, nor did they look away. They had not come to challenge anyone, yet their presence had done exactly that. The dinner continued after a long pause, but something had changed. The quiet power in the room no longer belonged to one man alone. The silence that followed the girl's words did not disappear quickly, and it stayed heavy in the air, making the large hall feel smaller and closer than before. People who had been relaxed only moments ago now felt uncertain, and uncomfortable chairs made soft sounds as guests shifted and looked at one another, unsure of what was expected next. No one wanted to break the quiet because it felt meaningful. Mr. Kuroda remained still with his eyes lowered toward the table. The smooth surface reflected the lights above, but he did not seem to notice. For many years his voice alone had controlled rooms like this, and people had always waited for him to speak. Now a young girl had spoken with calm honesty, and the room no longer belonged to him in the same way. Maya sat quietly beside her parents with her hands resting gently in her lap. She did not smile or show pride, and she did not look away either. She simply waited. Lena felt her chest loosen as she watched her daughter. She reached out and lightly touched Maya's arm, feeling thankful that the girl had spoken with respect instead of anger. Arun kept his eyes forward, but his thoughts traveled far from the hall. He remembered long days in other countries working beside people who shared little but gave freely. He remembered simple meals, laughter, and tired smiles. Those memories felt alive again, as if they had been called back by his daughter's words. A man seated across the table finally spoke, and his voice was careful and sincere. He told Maya that her words were beautiful and that her Japanese sounded natural, like someone who had lived there. Maya answered politely and said she learned from people who believed teaching was an act of kindness and not a favor. Her answer caused several guests to pause and think. Mr. Kuroda slowly lifted his head. The sharpness that once lived in his eyes was gone, and his voice was quieter when he asked if her family had really helped rebuild after a disaster. Maya looked at him respectfully and explained that they stayed longer than planned because people needed help. His fingers pressed together as he leaned back, and old memories surfaced, memories of a small town he once came from long before wealth defined him. The dinner slowly returned to motion. Plates were served and glasses were lifted again, but the mood had changed. Conversations became softer and more thoughtful. People spoke less about profit and more about places they had been and lessons they had learned. Lena found herself speaking comfortably with a woman beside her who listened with genuine interest, and Arun shared experiences with a man who spoke to him as an equal. Mr. Kuroda watched all of this quietly. He noticed how people leaned toward the family not because of status but because of sincerity. He asked Maya if she still practiced the language, and she answered that she practiced every day because language loses meaning when respect is forgotten. The words stayed with him, and he nodded slowly. As the evening moved toward its end, Mr. Kuroda stood, and the room grew quiet. Out of habit, he raised his glass and spoke honestly, saying that the night had reminded him that respect does not come only from position, and that wisdom sometimes arrives quietly without warning. His eyes rested briefly on Maya and her parents before he sat back down. When the night ended, guests approached the family with thanks, questions, and warm smiles. As they stepped outside into the cool air, Lena felt calm, Arun felt light, and Maya walked between them, steady and quiet behind them. Mr. Kuroda stood by a window looking at the city lights, thinking not of power or success but of a young girl who reminded him of something he had forgotten. The days after the dinner passed quietly, but the memory of that night stayed alive in many minds. The hall returned to its usual rhythm, yet something unseen had shifted beneath the surface. Conversations moved forward but carried a different tone, and people remembered the calm voice of a young girl who spoke without fear or pride. Her words had not demanded attention, yet they had settled deeply and refused to fade. Maya returned to her normal life with her parents. Their home was small and warm, filled with familiar sounds and routines. Lena returned to her daily work, and Arun continued helping wherever his hands were needed. Maya went back to her books and lessons, yet she felt different, as if a door had opened inside her and light had entered. She did not talk much about the dinner, but she thought about it often. News of the evening traveled quietly through circles of influence, not as gossip but as reflection. Some guests spoke of it during meetings, and others mentioned it during travel. They did not speak of wealth or status but of humility and respect, and of a child who reminded adults of something they had forgotten. Mr. Kuroda heard these quiet mentions, and each time he did, he paused. He found himself thinking about his past more than usual. He remembered his early years when he carried boxes instead of signing papers, when he listened more than he spoke. He remembered elders who corrected him gently and neighbors who shared meals without asking for return. These memories had been buried beneath years of ambition and control, yet now they returned with clarity. One evening Mr. Kuroda sat alone in his office looking at the city below. Lights stretched endlessly and the buildings stood tall, symbols of success he had built, yet the view felt distant. He thought of Maya and her calm presence. He wondered how such wisdom could live so easily within someone so young. He made a decision quietly without announcement. He asked his assistant to find information about the town Maya spoke of and about the rebuilding work done there. He did not explain why. When the reports arrived, he read them slowly. He saw photos of small homes repaired, schools reopened, and smiling faces standing beside strangers who became family. He recognized a truth he had ignored. Days later a letter arrived at Maya's home. It was simple and respectful. Lena read it carefully and passed it to Arun. They looked at each other surprised. The letter was from Mr. Kuroda. He thanked them for attending the dinner and for reminding him of something valuable. He invited the family to visit one of his community projects, not as guests but as advisors. Maya read the letter quietly. She did not feel excitement or fear. She felt responsibility. She knew this invitation was not about power, it was about listening. When they arrived at the project site, the atmosphere was different from the dinner hall. There were no shining floors or quiet music, only open space, tools, voices, and work being done. Mr. Kuroda greeted them without formality. He wore simple clothes and stood among the workers, not above them. He introduced Maya and her parents not by titles but by their actions. He spoke of rebuilding and learning and shared effort. The workers listened with interest and respect. Maya noticed how differently he spoke now. His voice held less command and more care. As the day passed, Maya spoke with the children at the site. She listened to their stories and shared her own. She used simple words and warm smiles. Lena helped organize supplies and Arun joined the workers repairing structures. Mr. Kuroda watched quietly. He saw the ease with which the family blended into the space and how naturally respect followed them. Later he walked beside Maya and asked her why she spoke the way she did that night. She answered honestly. She said she spoke the way she was taught by people who believed kindness was strength and listening was power. She said words should build bridges, not walls. Mr. Kuroda stopped walking and looked at her. He thanked her again, not as a host or a billionaire, but as a man learning. He admitted that he had forgotten how to listen and that her voice reminded him of a simpler truth. The sun lowered slowly and the workday ended. People gathered tired but satisfied. Mr. Kuroda felt a quiet peace he had not known in years. He understood that success without understanding was empty and that respect could not be demanded, only earned. Maya and her family returned home that evening tired but content. They spoke little but shared smiles. The world had not changed overnight, but something meaningful had begun. And in that beginning Maya understood that her voice carried more than language. It carried responsibility and hope and the power to remind others of who they could be. Time moved forward gently after the visit to the community project and life slowly settled into a new rhythm for everyone involved. The excitement of that day did not fade but instead turned into quiet purpose. Maya returned to her studies. Lena continued her work with renewed energy and Arun kept offering his hands wherever help was needed. Their days looked ordinary from the outside, yet something inside them felt steady and bright. Mr. Kuroda, on the other hand, found it hard to return to his old ways. Meetings felt different and decisions carried new weight. He listened more than he spoke, and when he did speak his words were careful. He began visiting projects without notice, standing among workers and listening to their stories. The people noticed the change and responded not with fear but respect. The story of the young girl and the dinner slowly became something else. It was no longer about embarrassment or surprise. It became a quiet example shared in conversations across offices and gatherings. People spoke of leadership shaped by listening and of strength shown through humility. Without realizing it, many began to change the way they spoke and the way they treated those around them. Maya did not seek attention, yet opportunities found her. Teachers asked her to help with language programs and students gathered around her curious and inspired. She never spoke as an expert, she spoke as a learner, sharing what others had given her. She reminded them that language was a bridge and respect was the path that made it strong. Lena and Arun watched their daughter grow with quiet pride. They did not push her forward or pull her back. They trusted her instincts and supported her gently. Their home remained simple, but it felt fuller than ever, filled with conversations that mattered and moments of shared understanding. One afternoon a message arrived from Mr. Kuroda. He invited Maya to speak at a small gathering, not to impress but to explain how respect changes communities. She agreed without hesitation. When she stood before the group she spoke calmly about listening, about kindness, and about learning from those different from us. Her words were simple yet they reached deep. Mr. Kuroda listened from the side. He did not introduce her by name or achievement. He simply listened like everyone else. In that moment he felt lighter than he had in years. He understood that leadership did not mean standing above others, it meant standing with them. As seasons changed, the projects grew not only in size but in spirit. Workers felt valued and communities felt heard. Mr. Kuroda guided from behind, allowing others to lead and grow. He knew now that his greatest success was not measured in buildings or wealth but in the lives touched through shared respect. Maya continued her journey quietly. She learned new languages, met new people, and carried the lessons of that night wherever she went. She never forgot that her voice had power, not because of volume but because of sincerity. The world did not transform all at once, yet small changes spread steadily like light through open windows. A dinner once filled with judgment had become the beginning of understanding. A billionaire once certain of his place had learned to listen. A young girl once unseen had shown that respect spoken with kindness can change more than a room. And so the story did not end with applause or celebration. It ended with growth and reflection, and the understanding that true respect lives in simple words spoken with an honest heart.